everyone, and welcome to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. It is Tuesday, March 26th. I am your host, Tommy Brzee, and we have a great show for you today. We are going to start talking about Oregon State and Washington State. They just got a huge win over the teams that are departing the the Pac-12, that I do want to get into. Then we're going to jump into some news around the news around the April transfer portal, which seems to be a very, very crazy time that is coming just around the corner. Then we're going to talk about J.J. McCarthy. There are a lot of people that have a lot of varying opinions about him, and I want to kind of split the middle here tonight and see if I can give my take on the quarterback that has a lot of people talking at the very least. And then at the end of the show, you want to stick around because we have another Top 10 Tuesday. Today we're going to go into quarterback and wide receiver duos that I'm watching going into 2024 that I think are setting the pace for the rest of them. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your questions in front of my eyes and have me answer it or just respond to a comment, whatever it is that you would like to say, you can use the link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCPodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to watch the show, have your name on the screen, have a question, and we can have a fun back and forth here. So definitely use GSMCPodcast.net if you have any of those questions. But let's jump right in because we've had some very interesting news come out of the Pac-12. The Pac-12 obviously is down to Oregon State and Washington State, so the Pac-2 if you want to call it that. But they just got another huge win. This is coming about a week or so after they got a huge win in the college football playoff discussions by being able to negotiate a little bit of a bump in their revenue distribution for that contract that everyone signed about 2 weeks ago now. Oregon State and Washington State were able to bump up their total from about $350,000 a year to $3.6 million. So obviously a massive bump there, keeps them in the conversation. But now they have even more money rolling in 2024. It looks like the schools that are heading out of the conference, as we know, we have 4 schools heading to the Big Ten. We have Oregon, Washington, Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA. In the Big 12, we have Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and Arizona State heading that way. And then all the way out there in the ACC, we have Stanford and Cal heading out there to play their following season. So everyone's gone. All the other 10 teams have found new places to play. It's only them left, and they have been in a battle for quite some time talking about what are the repercussions of this. What is the dollar amount that is going to these two teams, because at the end of the day, the college football playoff does not consider them a quote-unquote conference because you have to have at least 8 teams in your conference to qualify for an automatic bid in the college football playoff. So they technically didn't have a ton of leg to stand on, whereas if you're, the SEC or even the Big 12 a couple of years ago with Texas and OU finding their way out, they had an entire conference. They had, 10 other teams to fall back on and make sure that everything was steady and they could get those teams out and get a little bit of payday back for the teams that are hanging around. So this situation was obviously a little bit different. The vast majority of the teams were leaving. Oregon State and Washington State were kind of fighting a battle against an entire army as 2 soldiers. So they were really up against it, and they were able to get a huge win. It looks like those schools are going to get $65 million combined from the schools that are leaving, and the payments are going to come from now until June, with some $5 million payments, some $1.5 million payments as kind of supplemental pay throughout that time. So this is a huge deal. I think this is something that a lot of us, including myself, I'll be totally honest, a year ago was sitting in, just talking or thinking about college football and kind of the future and seeing everything unfold, especially around the Pac-12. And I was sitting there thinking, okay, the Pac-12 is no longer a thing. Essentially, I genuinely believed that there was very little chance that they were going to survive this craziness that is ahead of us. And as we know, it's nowhere near stopping. The ACC is opening up a whole new can of worms with all of these lawsuits that are coming in front of them and all of these different things that are happening. So the Pac-12 somehow, among all of the craziness that has happened and them being two teams all alone by themselves out there, they were able to kind of find their way out. And obviously, there is still so much work to do, which we'll get to here in a second. But as of right now, this is as big of a win as this conference has had in a really long time. And it's really cool to see just because those two teams were essentially left for dead. None of those 10 teams that have found new places to play were very worried about what happened to Oregon State and Washington State at the end of all this. I don't think they were much worried about how much of a say they were going to have in college football playoff discussions. I don't think they cared how much money was coming in. I think they were more worried about themselves, which I'm not necessarily going to fault them on, but it did leave these two programs in a really, really tough position. And them being able to, at the very least, have a leg to stand on to find their way out of this is absolutely huge news. So there is a huge part of this that isn't usually the case in these scenarios because there isn't usually this mass exodus. They essentially were having to fight for the ability to control their own conference. So with 10 teams leaving and the Pac-12, the majority of those teams were heading elsewhere, there was still power in those teams' hands to possibly dissolve the Pac-12 or just get rid of it altogether because, they're 10 teams against 2. But now it seems that that can no longer be the case. Oregon State and Washington State would have to sign off on the Pac-12 dissolving before that could happen. So that's never going to happen, or at least in the near future that's not going to happen because it looks more and more like these Pac-12 teams are kind of putting their foot in the ground and holding firm on this, that they want to be a conference. They want to be a part of the conversation going forward. We talked about a little bit on Friday with some of the messed up audio that we'll get back to this Friday, but we were talking about the idea of the Pac-12 backfilling with some teams and who those teams could be and when all of that would happen. It seems like they're eyeing this summer to start kind of looking at teams and possibly inviting teams into their conference and start to rebuild this. So the teams that I'm watching, obviously I think Gonzaga is a huge player because that basketball program has been remarkable for so many years. They're already out west. It makes a ton of sense. Obviously, that doesn't quite affect the football side of things because Gonzaga does not have a football program, but at the end of the day would help that conference take another step forward in the athletic space. And then you have teams like Boise State, you have UNLV, you have pretty much every ACC team at this very moment because there's a lot of unknown out there that will start to unfold over the next couple of months. And who knows, maybe there's a Pitt or a Louisville or even a Cal and a Stanford that just left that might be available to come back that way if the things that I tend to think are going to happen around the ACC start to happen, where more teams join lawsuits, more teams start to leave, and this thing kind of snowballs into the ACC being kind of just like a feeder program, essentially, for other conferences for the time being, where a lot of teams are going many different places, whether it's the Big Ten or the SEC, or as we talked about yesterday, the Big 12 is a big player in all of this, not only for the teams on the lower part of the ACC in terms of how big they are, like the Pitts and the Louisvilles, but also for a Florida State or a Clemson. There's no guarantee that either of those teams are shoo-ins to get into either of those conferences. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this kind of plays out. But right now the Pac-12 is really on better footing than I think all of us thought they were going to be some time ago. And it's a huge deal for the future of college football. I think all of us have been talking about this consolidation that is going in the direction of the SEC and the Big Ten. And I don't necessarily think that this stops that train or really slows it all that much. But at the end of the day, if the ACC is going to start to dissolve, if the ACC is going to start to lose Clemson, and then Florida State, and then North Carolina follows, and then some interesting things happening around Miami that maybe I'll get a segment in tomorrow about. But other teams are going to join. And once that happens and teams start to kind of file off from the ACC, they're going to have to backfill with some teams. And then it just becomes an entire frenzy between these two conferences. So it seems like, as of right now, you have the SEC and the Big Ten. They are on as steady a footing as literally anyone in the entire sport. They will be that way for a very long time. There's no two ways about that. But these other two conferences, the Big 12 is on pretty steady footing right now. I don't think they're really worried about necessarily the future. Obviously, they're getting a substantially less of a cut in the college football playoff discussions than the SEC and the Big Ten, but they have a really good position right now where the ACC is starting to kind of crack. You can pull teams from there and then just kind of be that third conference, although that's not where you necessarily want to be. There's not much of a fight to be put up against the SEC and the Big Ten right now. So the Big 12, I think, is in a really good spot to just be in the conversation for a long time because they have enough teams and enough groups to garner the respect in those rooms, which is a huge deal. And then there's two conferences that there's a lot of questions around, and it's the Pac-12 and the ACC. And it seems, as I can see, if you were looking at, the stocks of those two conferences, the ACC is steadily going down and the Pac-12 is steadily rising. And it's been something that's happened rather quickly for the Pac-12. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes before we know about it. So this could be, have been talks for a very long time with the college football playoff and all of these different things that have happened. But I know for a fact these new agreements with the departing schools is a relatively new thing that has been taking a while, but officially became news at least yesterday. But all of this has happened in a pretty short amount of time, and it's happened very shortly after George Kliavkoff was let go, and they brought in Teresa Gould as their AD, the first female AD of a Power 5 conference, which is obviously a massive deal. And she has done an incredible job. She started her job in the beginning of this month, so obviously some of these decisions were, starting to get underway and starting to be decided, but she stepped right in and took it in stride. All of this craziness around the conference that very well could have led to the conference not being a thing in 10 years, but she took it in stride and she handled it very, very well, and obviously has done two major things with the playoff distribution deal and then this deal. It gives the Pac-12 a fighting shot, and at this point, that's really all you can ask for when you're fighting up against the SEC and the Big Ten, where they have no intention on giving away any of the power that they've gained. They have no intention on throwing everyone a lifeline and giving everyone a break from all of the craziness, but at least the Pac-12 now is on the way up, is on the way to being in the conversation. There were many points where they just didn't even have a seat at the table, and now you're getting a seat at the table, and then you build from there. So the Pac-12, obviously, there is still a lot of work to do. You got to find teams that want to come into your conference, teams that will improve your conference from a national perspective, and you have to do it rather quickly because there are a lot of stuff happening. The ACC is going to start purging members, it seems, here pretty soon, but and the Pac-12 might be able to benefit from that, but the Pac-12 is still very much up against it, but the good news keeps rolling in. So as of right now, I'd feel pretty confident, and if you were a Pac-12 fan, I think your conference honestly might be in a better spot than the ACC right now. So very interesting juxtaposition between what we had last year with people questioning if it was going to be a thing in 4 years, and now where they might be on some of the best footing other than, the big boys up top. But it'll be really interesting to see how all of this unfolds, which schools the Pac-12 goes after, and if some ACC schools become available for them to go after in the next couple of months. But we will keep you updated on all of that, of course. But the Pac-12 and Teresa Gould are doing pretty well from themselves right now. But we're going to take our first break right now. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the transfer portal. There has been a lot of chatter around the April transfer portal window and some craziness that is around the corner. So we will break all that down right after this.